This is the All Rev'd Up Podcast, and this is season number 5, episode number 5. And I'm Reverend Emmett Price.
And I'm Reverend Irene Monroe.
Irene, before we introduce our very, very, very special guest for this episode, let us thank each of our listeners and our viewers. Thank you for listening to us on the various podcast apps and for watching the actual live recording of the podcast on our YouTube channel. We are grateful for your support, your encouragement, your feedback, your reviews, and your comments. Thank you so much for sharing this podcast with others.
And I must, as always, offer up a tsunami of thanks to our listeners. But before we begin, I want us to also give a tsunami of thanks to our creative producers, Kyla Wright and Kavontae Smalls.
Hear, hear. All right, let's go. Roll it.
Eventually, he returned to Blountstown, where he continued to give back. In 2007, Davis donated his gold medal to the Blountstown Library because he wanted people of this county to understand the role black aviators played in defense of America.
It was never talked about prior to, prior to when they organized the first chapter in Detroit.
The voice you heard is our special guest for this episode, our own co-producer, Kavontae Smalls. And before we have him come on, that was from 2011. I understand Kavontae was just a young tuck. I'm not going to give his age because I don't want to embarrass myself or you, Irene. But he was very, very young and he was doing a television spot on the Tuskegee Airmen during the release of the movie Red Tails. That was 2011, and that was WJHG, Panama City, Florida. This young man is Florida born and raised. He's a graduate of the University of West Florida. He is an award-winning multimedia journalist with experience spanning commercial and public media, as well as media relations, both in the nonprofit and the governmental sectors. He is a national news reporter, podcast producer, media consultant, media relations professional. He has earned 2. Irene, not one, but not 2.
One, that's right, but 2.
National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, Emmys. He's won a Boston New England Governor's Award, a National Association of Black Journalists Salute to Excellence Award, and more and more and more. And he currently, in addition to being a co-producer for the All Rev'd Up Podcast, is a national reporter and multimedia journalist for the Atlantic Black Star. Kavontae Smalls, what's up?
Hey. and say this, and he's just a millennial.
He's just a millennial. That's why I didn't give his age.
Okay.
I am 34 and I'm proud of it. There we
go. Well, Kavontae, you have been with us since season 2, and you came on board. You at the time were in the Boston area. I think you were living in Providence, but you were working for GBH, and you came on to help us with the social media and really helping us to develop and tell our story. And here we are in season 5, and you have been with us ever since. What was it like to work with Irene and to come on board with this podcast?
Now watch yourself.
I will say this, one of the very first memorable interactions I had with the podcast, I remember first of all being approached to do it, and I remember excited to do it. I was looking to expand a lot more and really kind of I would say plant my feet, plant some seeds in the different spaces. And I remember I went downstairs and to meet you both, and we were heading into the studio. And I was thinking, I can just, record a little bit on Facebook to kind of start promoting the podcast. And Irene, she told me, she says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm just going to record you guys getting ready." She says, "Oh, no, I'm not ready." Yep. And I was like, okay. And I totally thought she was joking. So I'm kind of like keeping going. I'm thinking this is a bit. And then once I finished, she goes, "So what are you going to do with that?" I said, "We were going to get ready to, to post it online, to start promoting." She goes, "No, you're not." I told you I wasn't ready. You got to come back tomorrow and I can, get myself together. And I remember at that point thinking, oh, okay, Irene's really, really not ready. So we'll come back tomorrow. And she had on her nice little bucket hat that day, I believe. Mm-hmm. And so she was like, no, I got to fix my hair. I got to get myself together. And so that was my introduction.
Hey, Kavontae, you being nice because Irene told you off on that first time. She rode you up and down. I remember that day.
That's exactly right. Okay. Because Kavontae knows Black women very well. Okay. So when I said no, admit no, and when I said I got to fix myself up. Now he understands Black church women.
I did, Irene. I really did. I understood the assignment, and going forward internally,
that's right.
The pressure that I received. Oh, we got to start posting stuff. I say, yeah, we do, but I got to make sure I tell Emmett and Irene first. We're not just going to ambush them anymore. We're not doing that.
And you would always tell me way in advance, which I certainly appreciate that. But I knew that what we had in our midst, because you came on before we even revved up with the podcast because of our segment on WGBH, and I saw then I actually thought you were an intern from a college intern. So when they said, "No, this is a college graduate," I was like, "Oh, okay." I said they're getting younger and younger, but nonetheless here. But what I did notice, and what Emmett and I talked about a lot, was that this is a very talented brother, multi-talented, and very humble with your gift here. And so, and the thing that I think that has amazed me, and you've not kind of told me this, so maybe you can tell, as I ask this question, you will tell the audience. I am intrigued by how you sniff out stories. That's one. And how you can take a story that is local and it becomes of national interest. I really want that, because your parameter is wide, because you really start, as I think, right here, like you were starting right here in Boston, but the story picks up nationally, and it's a theme that hits, whatever the topic is, a national interest of a variety of people. Now you got to tell me this, how you do this.
Well, I will just say this: I do spend a lot of time reading all sorts of things, scrolling social media, and I follow many influencers. I follow a number of news outlets, both on a more your traditional standpoint as well as more on the blog side of things. And I'm always scrolling things to see, what's trending, or shall I say, if it presents a question or if it presents an issue or problem that needs greater scrutiny. And those are sorts of things that sort of grabs my attention. And at that point, I start reaching out. And I just reach out and ask questions. Sometimes me probing leads to an actual story. Sometimes it just fulfills a personal curiosity that I may have. And as far as, taking an issue and making it a national issue, quite frankly, a lot of the issues that impacts people, whether it's in Pensacola, Florida, Boston, Detroit, wherever, there is an example of that happening in other places. And so that's how you can nationalize it. Now, I might go a step further by tapping into, contact lists to say, hey, let me get some analysis on what it's like for this family who might be grieving over an issue. What is it like for them to be going through this? And I could, reach out to, say, Dr. Charmaine Jackman, and, over in the Boston area, or I could reach out to, the sister of someone else, say in Dallas, Texas. And that kind of broadens the scope, surely. But again, as you were saying, Irene, all of these issues, they are local in sense, and that's sort of the same thing that we think of collectively when we're coming up with topics. To hit on. We think of our audience and think of, people, in Florida, for example, they grew up in the Black church. They know what it's like when, the preacher's getting a little antsy and we start to hearing the organ fade in on the background. It's time to get up, because it's about, that translates no matter where you are. So.
Well, speaking of church and getting up, you are a natural in front of the camera. You are a natural behind the camera. Yeah. You are a natural on social media. You are a natural in terms of interpreting and analyzing So tell me, as a kid, was this the pathway that you always knew was meant
Yeah.
for you, or how did you get here?
Yeah.
This is a very interesting question, and I really didn't have a good answer for it until maybe in my mid-20s, and because I didn't grow up with a media role model per se. My family, or shall I say, my parents, they went to the military, and they stayed in. They did not go to college. Yet I do find it, inspiring that even though that wasn't their upbringing, they're working alongside people with doctorate degrees. And so that was inspiring to me. But my interest in news really developed, being around my grandparents. They would always watch CNN, always had CNN on. And I would love to just go hang around with my grandparents all the time. And so I didn't realize what it was doing to me subconsciously. But when I got older, it was starting to have an impact on me. When it was time to choose a career, I was initially going to go into meteorology, and I was accepted into Florida State University to do that until I realized the advanced math and calculus involved, and I switched over pretty quickly to just telling stories. And that's kind of how I fell into that lane, doing that. And I'm always conscious, too, that, God has given me a platform, and I like to use that to help others if they don't have access to people that I may have access to.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Irene, we got just a little bit of time before we have to take a break, but get a question in.
Yeah.
Let's give our viewers something.
Yeah, absolutely. So you did a topic that when you did it, I said, now I knew that this was going to be a national topic. You did a show on Black male mental illness. And you gathered some esteemed, folks, one of which is the Reverend Emmett Price. But I was just, that conversation to this day, I still remember it. I sent a lot of people to that show. You gave voice to a voiceless topic. Not that it's not there front and center, but the way you did it was it destigmatized. It was like, oh, this is not as difficult. This should not be in the closet as much as it is. It was so healing just to even hear the conversation. And you both can talk on that one because you both were involved.
Yes, I do remember that show, and honestly, I can't remember what prompted that whole show, but I do remember coming across, upon my research, there was a new independent film that was actually coming out, and I reached out to the producers of that film to ask them would they do a quick Zoom call or something. This was before COVID, so this wasn't as in vogue as it eventually became to be. And I asked them, what prompted it, and it was really, centered around the idea that, men, especially black men, black and brown men, there is this idea that we kind of always have to have it together. And even when we don't have it together, we face an added stigma that even, our black sisters don't have to deal with. And I know that weighs on people. I have friends that it weighs on people. I've visited people in prison sometimes where at that point, it's kind of almost too late. It's definitely weighed on them. And so these are these sorts of conversations that, I like to say, in the barbershop or on the front porch, that we're able to bring forth and bring to light, but in a very comforting way. And I think one of the takeaways from that, and I still remember it, is how vulnerable everyone allowed themselves to be. And I think that conveyed through to the audience watching.
Did that win an Emmy? Was that one of the Emmy nominated, I think, right?
I would have to go back and look. I cannot remember.
Because you have so many and you get accolades all the time. Well, I have to go see.
While he's going back to check to see if that won an Emmy, we're going to take a break. We are with the brilliant Kavontae Smalls, co-producer of the All Rev'd Up Podcast, and we will be right back.
A loud pop sound, which I immediately thought it sounded like a gunshot.
Pinellas County Sheriff's deputies say an intruder broke into her neighbor's home while he was lying in bed.
At that time, the homeowner, 66-year-old Carl Edward Ott, was in his bed asleep when he heard the noise. And at that time, he got up, grabbed his handgun to confront these suspects.
Investigators say Ott got into a scuffle with the intruder and the intruder shot him.
The voice you heard was that of our co-producer of the All Rev'd Up Podcast, Kavontae Smalls. If he was 12 in the first clip when we started this episode, this time he was 15. This was December 2nd, 2016, where Kavontae was serving as the Public Information Officer for the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office. And this was on WFLA, Tampa, Florida. We are with co-producer Kavontae Smalls. Irene, before we went on break, we were talking about his numerous awards and accolades and the fact that we also know him as a television producer during his days here at GBH, working on the Basic Black Show. Kavontae, you've met so many people over the course of your career, but you have also brought so many people to the limelight, not just their stories, but you've also brought creative experts and content experts and talking heads into the limelight as well. What is that like to make a phone call out of the blue, call somebody and say, I want you on my show?
It's interesting to say that I'm not a fan of cold calls, believe it or not. But I know that's a part of my job and always is and always will be. But I'm more of an email first type person if I can help it. That kind of like breaks the ice before we get there, but it doesn't always work out that way. And so there are times where I do cold call people, and sometimes they answer, sometimes they don't. In fact, it still happens to this very day where I will call and we'll ring about 4 times, and you expect the the person you've called, and they end up picking up the phone, and I'm thinking it's a voicemail. So I start my little spiel, and they're like, "Hello, hello," and I'm like, "Oh, wait a minute, you're actually here." So that definitely happens. In fact, I think that was one of the. In fact, I think that's sort of what happened with Ben Crump when I first spoke to him not too long ago. I'm thinking, "Oh, he's too busy. He don't have time." And then he gets on the phone. I'm like, "Is this Mr. Crump for real, Mr. Crump?" So yeah, it can be a little nerve-wracking at times, I have to admit. But also, I one of the things that I always try to do, and I've always done this throughout my career, is I like to make people feel comfortable. When I have conversations with people, they're technically interviews, but I like to have a conversation. I always hated, the ping pong sort of conversation because it gets very stilted, as time goes along. And I like to have conversations. And by the time I get done, yes, people don't want to hang up the phone with me.
Well, I have a question. Every journalist have people that they would certainly like to interview in their lifetime for a sundry of reasons. Some personal, some in terms of what kind of gems can you impart to the person here. And so everyone, in some way have, whether conscious of it or not, have a bucket list. So I want to know, do you have a bucket list? Who's the person on the top of your list if you haven't interviewed that person? And what were you hoping in interviewing that person to get from that person? What did you want to know? Other than just, I'm interviewing that person,
I will say this before I reveal the person at the top of the list. Actually, I just mentioned Ben Crump. I find Ben Crump very, very fascinating for a variety of reasons. And he was actually on the bucket list. He was on there. And so when I had this conversation with him, and we kind of chatted it up, and I remember I gave him my phone number, and we it's the 850 area code. He's from Tallahassee, so that all kinds of spans the Florida Panhandle area, and so we kind of bonded over that. And so that was very, very fun, and I find him very fascinating with his story. But the person at the top of my bucket list actually is Barack Obama.
Okay.
And I find his personal story just so fascinating. His personal story, but also his professional journey. I just find it very fascinating. And probably, the most fascinating aspect about it is, despite his challenges that he's dealt with throughout his entire life, he didn't let it hold him down from accomplishing his goals. And he's dealt with a number of challenges, as we all know. Many of them are well documented by this point. And I just always found it very fascinating how, despite the mountainous terrain that he had to embark, he still kept pressing forward. And in the midst of doing so, encouraged a whole new generation of people along the way. And I was one of the few people, I'm sure, that when his book came out a couple of years ago, I read it and literally was laughing out loud throughout various parts of it. It was just very fascinating. But I'm also a political junkie, so I'm also very.
But that's an
fascinated with stuff
1,000-page.
like
Well, I need to
just
say,
another
when you
person-
say his book,
Yeah.
that's a 1,000-page tome. Did you read that? Did you read that book, or are you talking about another book?
I read his most recent book that he came out with, because I think it's going to
That's
be
right.
two
And the
volumes.
first one
but
is
the
a-
first portion that covered,
Yep.
I
Then
think,
that's
his
1,000 pages.
Yep. I read that and I enjoyed every bit of it. Read that, and I would probably say another person who, unfortunately, won't be able to physically have an interview with, but it was one of our earlier episodes, Irene. You brought to my attention the impact of Shirley Chisholm and how and what she meant to you. And I remember that's one of the great parts about doing our podcast. I learned so much from both of you and Kyla all the time. And when I get to go and add my 2 cents to it, and pull certain video clips and things like that, I get to go on that journey as well. And she's someone that I enjoyed learning about and would have loved to be able to have that conversation.
She would have loved
Well,
you.
you
She would have
talked
loved
about-
you. Go ahead, Emmett. I'm sorry, but she would have loved you.
You talked about reading Barack Obama's most recent book. What are you reading now? What are you listening to now? And what are you watching now?
Well, the book I'm reading now is called The Cosmos.
Oh, yes.
And it's by Andrew, and in fact, I even have it here. It's one of the things that I'm currently looking at here. And the reason I remember when I picked up that book, and the reason I am enjoying that is because it talks about astronomy. And I'm someone who's fascinated with astronomy. And as I've gotten older and learned more about it, I'm more fascinated. Now, granted, I'm not great with astrophysics and hard trigonometry, so I won't be doing any of that. But I do enjoy the idea of astronomy because it's where reality and imagination meet. And it's also hard to deny. There was a piece in that book where it talks about the pale blue dot, where you have the Voyager that's kind of drifting away from our solar system that looked back, and I think it was a shot of Saturn, and right beneath that is a very faint dot that was Earth. And to me, that just kind of, it always kind of puts things into perspective. No matter what we're going through or what we're dealing with, there is obviously a greater being to put all of this together. And it kind of just grounds me and my way of thinking. And I think, I think more people should really get into the cosmos and astronomy. So I definitely like that. What am I watching? Well, when it's not news, I actually just finished watching For the People. I don't watch a whole lot of scripted television as much as I probably would like to, but I just finished For the People, currently watching Reasonable Doubt. I love Abbott Elementary, things like that. So I'm currently following a lot of that, and I can't remember the last question, Emmett.
What are you listening to?
What am I listening to? When I'm not listening to a wrestling podcast, and when it's not All Rev'd Up Podcast. As far as artists, though, I'm a big fan of Drake.
All right.
How do you listen to a wrestling? I mean, isn't that something that you need to see?
They have the wrestling show, then they have the analysis after the show, and so that's and it's that part, and in the wrestling world, there's a whole thing in unto itself. So yeah, there's a lot.
And that's scripted. I just want you to know, that's scripted.
The wrestling is yes. The fallout, no, and that's where the interesting piece comes in.
Well, you talked about how much you learn from us. We have learned a tremendous amount from you. You have been a tremendous gift to not only Irene and I, and then Kyla, but also to our podcast and what we've grown together over the last couple of years. And it truly is a special team-oriented, content or creative sharing of ourselves that we give to our listeners and viewers. And you help us to craft and share our stories in a way that we do it. And of course, the listeners are responding, the viewers are responding. And so we're so grateful to you. Irene, your final word.
Yeah, and Kavontae, I just want to say another thing. Thanks to you, I can do Twitter. But I want to say a couple of words about the team, you and the team here. But as a multi-talented young brother and a multimedia journalist, Kavontae, I am proud of you and I am proud to know you. You are producing a body of work that is essential to how Black men see and understand this country and their place in the world right now, even as the problems of race and racial violence continue to plague this nation. You affirm Black male excellence with your erudition and professionalism. And it is a Black maleness that mainstream society has historically derided or dismissed. Yet you have shown with your work that it is untouchable and undeniably unique. Black men are a threat to the status quo. Yet it is in this charged reality, Kavontae, that your work finds itself in the spotlight. Your work moves us away from the familiar and conventional forms of seeing and reporting by creating a balance between the verbal and the visual, with a cultural appreciation and cultural affirmation of unapologetic Blackness and unabashed boldness. In the years that I've known you, Kavontae, I've learned to do three things with you, which is very hard for me to do. Watch, listen, and learn, because there are no words that will capture the enormity of your talent. And to our listeners, we're always delighted when you tune in to the All Rev'd Up Podcast, but we are particularly elated that our audience have had the time and the opportunity to tune in to the previous episodes. The one last week with Kyla Wright and this week with Kavontae Smalls, allowing Reverend Price and myself to showcase the creative geniuses behind the scenes. It is our honor that you folks chose to work with us. And we give you thanks. And Reverend Price and I thank you for the transformation and growth our growth by having the opportunity for working with a multi-talented and multifaceted producers. We praise you both for this journey we have been on with you, for the gifts of your gift, for the beauty of your intelligence, and for your showcase of talents. As we know, working with you both in producing this podcast, the possibilities are endless. Ain't that right, Emmett?
Sure is.
Amen?
Amen.
And Ashe.
Ashe. All Rev'd Up is brought to you by us, the Revs. Our amazing producers are Kyla Wright and Kavontae Smalls.
Music for this episode is from Reverend Price's son and musical prodigy, Emmett G. Price IV. All Rev'd Up is distributed by GBH.
Additional thanks to Bob Kempf, Elizabeth O'Brien, May He, Devin Robbins, Meredith Neerman, and Zach Waldman.
If you like what you hear, let us know. Give us a review on Apple Podcasts and follow us at All Rev'd Up Pod on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube.
Feel free to send us a note, a question, or a comment to allrev'duppod@gmail.com. We'll be back